The year is almost over and most major product announcements have already happened. But I've got one more for you guys. A new gimbal. This is the Moza AirCross S, which launches today, and Moza sent this over for me to check out. They didn't pay me to say anything or even review this video before I'm publishing it, so these are my honest opinions about it. So this gimbal has quite a few selling points, such as a relatively affordable price and a maximum payload of 1,500 grams. So it can support a bunch of different cameras, such as a smartphone, a mirrorless camera, and an action camera, all on their own. But the main selling point that Moza is trying to push here is the fact that this gimbal can support all three devices at once, which is how I have it set up right now. But let's go ahead and turn the gimbal on and see if it will actually balance everything. Fingers crossed. Oh, and it worked. So it does indeed work. It only works if your cameras or your phone and your main mirrorless camera are in vertical mode. So you can't do this if it's in horizontal mode, but if it's in vertical, it will actually balance decently well. I do think that this is really pushing it in terms of how much weight this gimbal can support. I mean, the total weight is probably under the max payload, but just the balance of all of these cameras is really tricky. And so I did take it outside and I filmed like this, and I'll flash up some of the sample footage of what I got. And I do think it's pretty stable considering all of the cameras that it's supporting, but definitely pretty tricky to get everything balanced correctly so that the gimbal will actually support everything. And then when you're actually filming and walking and running or trying to do some kind of action, you can sometimes get that boat light effect where not everything is totally stable because, again, this is just a lot of weight for the gimbal to support, but it is indeed possible. I will say that this setup was kind of a pain in the butt to do, mostly because I have like a pre-production model and my kit did not come with all of the little adapters needed to attach the phone and also the action camera. So I had to go through my little odds and ends of camera accessories, and I managed to find all of the pieces. And so I did put everything together. It took a little while. I feel like the initial setup is always the hardest part because you're not always very familiar with everything. And so it takes a little bit of time to get it together, but once you get it together, it actually works out pretty decently. And so since I have this set up, let's go ahead and break it down and I'll show you how everything comes together. So I'm going to turn the gimbal off first. And so the first piece that I have here is the smartphone. So I was filming with the Samsung Galaxy S10, which I'm actually using to look at my notes right now. So this is Martin's old S9 here, but it is attached via the phone holder. The phone holder does come in the gimbal kit. And this little piece here is a cold shoe little adapter piece, which was missing in my kit, but again, I'm hoping that they ship this out to you guys because this is kind of hard to find by itself. But this part screws into the bottom of the phone adapter, and then the cold shoe part goes on top of your camera. So if you want to do this setup, you ideally want to use a camera that does have a cold shoe or a hot shoe mount on it. So the main camera that I'm using here is my Sony a7 IV. I'm using the Sony 28 to 60 millimeter lens, which this is my first time actually using this lens. I did a video about this lens recently and how it's so small that I forgot that I had it, but this is actually a good application for this little lens because it's so tiny. It's a great mid-range zoom and it's very lightweight, so it's great for using on a gimbal. So there we go. I've removed my camera or my mirrorless camera from the whole rig, and then here is the piece that's holding the action camera. And so you can put in really any action camera of choice. Moza demonstrates using a 360 camera like the X3, and again, I think this is really a testament to how much sideways weight this gimbal can actually support because, you know, it makes for a really long camera setup when you have the X3 attached. But yeah, this is how you would set up this whole rig with the three different cameras. Alright, so now that I took apart the three cameras, let's talk about how practical it is to actually shoot this way with three cameras all at once. Now, personally, I would not shoot this way because I can't think of a time when I need three cameras to be rolling all at the same time. But if you guys can think of a good use case for doing that, then let me know. And this might be a really great gimbal for you if you want to do it that way. but I think it's most practical to be able to shoot with 2 devices at once, because I often am torn if I want to capture a video moment for Instagram, in which case I would shoot vertically to be able to do a reel or a story, or for YouTube, in which I would want to shoot horizontally on my main camera. And so, unfortunately, this whole 3-camera setup only works if all of your cameras, or your main camera at least, and your phone are in vertical mode. So I do wish that there was a way to maybe have my Sony horizontal and the phone vertical. Like this little combo here, like I would shoot like this pretty often, honestly. But in terms of having both cameras vertical and then having, you know, a third action camera, I don't think I would use that setup too often, but maybe I'll be wrong in the future. So again, this is kind of just first impressions. I just got this gimbal, just testing it out. And so those are my overall first impressions for the 3-camera aspect of it. But let's go ahead and talk more about using this gimbal with a single camera, because there is a lot to say about that. So to demonstrate how to attach a single camera to the gimbal, I'm going to do so with my Sony a7 IV and the 28 to 60 millimeter lens, because this is the biggest and heaviest camera combination that I would use with this gimbal. But the mounting process is the same, whether you're using a mirrorless camera like this, a point and shoot, smartphone, action camera, you would do the exact same steps. So the first thing we want to do is unbox the entire gimbal. And so the gimbal comes in this nice zippered case. And so this gimbal bag is actually very small and significantly smaller and lighter and more practical than most other gimbal cases that I've seen lately. So the lid has cable organizers, which are really nice because it's a great use of space, but I do wish the cable organizers had a top or some way to keep the cables inside, because I find that when I'm flipping the lid open, the cables usually come flying out. So that's a little thing that could be improved here. But there are foam cutouts for all of the pieces of the gimbal. So here we have the main gimbal piece, which I'm going to pull out here. And we also have a mini tripod, and I recommend using this especially as you're initially setting up the gimbal, because you can just have it sitting here and not have to worry about it tipping over as you're adding pieces to it. And the other piece here is an L bracket and also a tripod plate. So the tripod plate, I went ahead and already attached it to the bottom of my camera, but you attach it to the bottom via the 1/4-inch hole. And most cameras already have that, but if you are working with a camera like a GoPro, then you might need this little adapter here. This gives you an adapter for the little fingers of the GoPro and gives you the 1/4-inch tripod mount. So the other piece that's in the gimbal setup here is a L bracket. And so this attaches to your camera and just slide it in until it attaches. Next, we want to go over to the gimbal, make sure that this arm is such that the Moza label is upright, and then see this little area here, this is where we slide in the L bracket. And so how exactly you do that depends on if you want a horizontal orientation or a vertical orientation. You do have to physically change it depending on how you want to shoot. But for me, I'm going to go with the horizontal orientation because that's how I primarily shoot with my gimbal. So we're just going to take the camera like this and just slide it in, and then take this little knob here and just tighten it until your camera is securely in place. And so at this point, you know, the gimbal's flopping around a bit, so you want to go to each axis here that has the little tightening screw, and you just want to play around with it until your camera is more or less level. That'll really help out the motor and your battery life in the gimbal. But then we're going to go over to the handle of the gimbal, and there's a button here that we're just going to press to turn the gimbal on. And there we go. Now using the gimbal is pretty easy. There's a joystick to move the camera up and down and to the left and to the right. And then to the right of the joystick is a menu button. Press once to access the menu, or double click to switch between the gimbal modes, or triple press to enter and exit inception mode. The front trigger button can also be pressed twice to recenter, and you triple press to go into selfie mode. By the way, you can also connect your camera to the gimbal via the included cables to start and stop recording. This works with most Sony, Canon, and Fujifilm cameras. I'll have a link below below to the full camera compatibility list below, but it does not work with GoPros or action cameras. You can physically attach those cameras to the gimbal, but you cannot connect them to use that record button to control the cameras. And finally, the gimbal can be connected to the Moza Master smartphone app for Android or for iPhone to control the gimbal remotely or unlock additional modes like motion time lapses. Now briefly, I do want to talk about one of the main competitors here, because when I first unboxed the Moza, I did a double take because I thought it looked strikingly similar to the Zhiyun Crane M3. There's also the Zhiyun Crane M2S as another option, but it is smaller and supports less weight and also cheaper, so it's kind of in a class of its own. I think that the Crane M3 is the most direct competitor to this Moza gimbal, so I'm not going to do a super in-depth comparison, but I'll give you some brief points about how they differ. Now they look almost identical, but the Zhiyun has a slightly larger LCD display, which is also a touchscreen, which is not the case on the Moza. Also, the joystick on the Zhiyun is dead center versus on the left-hand side of the handle of the Moza. Now I feel like for the Moza, it might be slightly harder for left-handed people to operate given the placement of the joystick. The Crane M3 also has a 1/4-20 hole on the left side of the handle for mounting accessories, while the Moza does not. Both gimbals also weigh 700 grams, and they have built-in rechargeable batteries that you cannot swap out. But the Moza has much longer battery runtime of 12 hours versus 8 hours on the Zhiyun, and it charges fully in just 1 hour compared to 2 hours on the Zhiyun. Also, the Zhiyun has a higher max payload of about 4.85 pounds compared to 3.31 pounds on the Moza. The Zhiyun also has a built-in LED light, which honestly I don't really use, so I don't really mind that it's missing on the Moza. And finally, the Zhiyun is more expensive at $359 US compared to the Moza, which is $100 cheaper at $259. So even though those two gimbals look really similar, there are some pretty big differences between them, but the main thing for a lot of you guys in the past has been price. And so the Crane M3 has been one of my favorite all-in-one gimbals to use, and I still do recommend it if you can afford it. But if price is an issue for you and you don't need that really high maximum payload, then you might want to look at the Moza AirCross S, because it has a lot of the same features as that Zhiyun gimbal, not quite as premium in a lot of ways, but still a really great all-in-one gimbal that can support cameras as big as a Sony a7 IV and some of those mid-range lenses, but it can also support smaller cameras like smartphones and action cameras. And I'm always talking about how for an action camera, you don't always need a gimbal because of that hyper-smooth or built-in stabilization that is really great on action cameras. But the second you take that action camera into low light, that's when your stabilization is really non-existent. And so that's when you might want to use a gimbal. And so I recommend getting a gimbal for your action camera, but if you can, you might as well go with a slightly bigger gimbal because they're just slightly more expensive than dedicated action camera gimbals, and they're also more practical because you don't only have to use it with your action camera. You can stick your smartphone on it. If you have a bigger camera like I do, you can put that camera on a gimbal like this. So I think that there's a lot of reasons to have an all-in-one gimbal in your camera arsenal. But you guys can let me know what you think in the comments below. If you're interested in a gimbal like this, if you did have this gimbal, would you use that 3-in-1 shooting combination where you would shoot with 3 cameras at once? And if so, let me know the use case, because I'm still looking for a reason of why I would want to shoot like that, but maybe I'm missing something. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.